It's 2031 and the battle continues. But in 1990, it was Terminator NOW!
It doesn't feel pity, or remorse, or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
Excerpt from the April 1st, 1989 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 162. Newsline. Now, Chuck Dixon, Todd Fox, and Enrique Viagran on Racer X. Steve Sullivan and Vince Argondesi, the current art and writing team on Racer X, will be departing shortly after having worked on the book for the past year. Their replacements will be writer Chuck Dixon and artists Todd Fox and Enrique Viagran. Dixon has worked for Marvel, DC, First, Eclipse, and Comico. His titles include Airboy, Alien Legion, Moon Knight, and Valkyrie. Fox has been working for Tim Truman's Four Winds studio. Viagran has been illustrating The Intruders, working title for Apple Comics. Now publisher Tony Caputo, who now has editorial control over the series, envisions a character who will be a cross between the lead on the television show Wise Guy and the Punisher. The book is going to be grittier, Caputo said. Racer X has a somewhat curious history. Originally a relatively minor supporting character on the Speed Racer television program, he was included in the comic book adaptation and became popular enough to earn his own title, along with a Racer X premiere special. Caputo will be renumbering the new series. The first issue, which will be on sale in June, will be Volume 2, Number 1. The April 15th, 1989 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 163, Newsline. Now, with issue number 10, Ralph Snart Adventures goes to all new material. Snart guy Mark Hansen will be leaving his staff position at Now to devote all his energies to Snart. Coming distractions for April 16th through 31st. Now Comics lists, Fright Night number 9, Racer X number 10, Ralph Snart Adventures number 10, Real Ghostbusters number 12, Rust number 7, Slimer number 3, Speed Racer number 22, Speed Racer Classics Volume 2, 225 pages of collected Speed Racer adventures, black and white comic, $3.95, ships in April, jumps the timeline from Terminator number quote-unquote 6 to Terminator number 11. John Connor saves the Sarah Slammers from the death trap called the Land of Disney. Color comic, $1.75, ships in April. The editorial content for Now Comics has moved to the last interior page. It's unfortunately a baby blue with black text. It's readable, I guess. So the Now Newsflash lists a bunch of the publisher's titles. This month's hot picks are hotter than ever, folks. You may be thinking, hey, they say that every month. Well, that may be, but I can assure you that it is especially true this month. So read on and I'll give you the rundown, and so on and so forth. At the very end it says, and in issue number 11 of The Terminator, we go deep inside and meet Skynet personally. Expanding about that in the on sale now solicitations. Terminator 11 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Rich Rankin, Suzanne Dechnik. Conrad and Tim visit a baby-making factory run by nuns beneath an amusement park. There's also a Coming and Up section, which again promotes a number of books, ends with, finally, the last entry in our Coming and Up section is the Terminator number 12. It's double-sized, with double the action, and it's the return of John Connor.
Progress on these original series stories have been slower than ideal, but I wanted to spend some time on the publishing environment for Terminator at Now Comics. There was also a lot of creative turnover on the specific title to address, but that's all over now. Permanent series writer Ron Fortier came in on issue number 9, midway through a story arc initiated by Jack Herman. Number 11 is where Fortier begins his run properly, introducing new characters and concepts that will propel his run. He's looked at the work before him, discussed its faults, and is now going to put the book on the right track. That new direction felt like it deserved to launch in its own episode, with Fortier speaking in his own voice as we focus on his issues. That should help expose the utter hypocrisy of calling other writers out for having too much talking, getting bogged down in science fiction overaction, and lacking strong characters. Right from the cover, some sort of tie-dyed image of a circus ringmaster in hologram form bursting through a vague semblance of computer-type stuff. We're alerted that this new track has sent the book off the rails. For instance, the story, titled Factories, starts with Conrad, Tim Reese, and the old Seminole woman Tama trekking through woods. They note an explosion in the sky, which I think alludes to the previous month's story, of which I've already forgotten the details. No sweat, as that nod hasn't any relevance to this issue. The second page features Iron Horse Adams and his cavalry troop returning to base. They're impressed at what Sarah Slammers accomplished at Cape Canaveral, but just shrug over whether they'll be seen again. Also, Crazy Man Deferred managed to escape, but Adams is indifferent and doesn't send anyone to look for him. The final panel shows Deferred with mad eyes, claiming to hear God and committing to be his servant. Subplots dispensed with, we then flash backward 48 hours to the Rocky Mountains of northern Montana. This is the NORAD command center taken over by Skynet. The Terminator unit that has been the lead antagonist in recent issues had been summoned there for direct questioning by Skynet. Yes, two machines in a post-internet future that we still haven't reached had to have a face-to-face. Except, Skynet doesn't have a face, right? Au contraire mon frère. Skynet is anthropomorphized into a hologram that initially takes the form of John Romita Jr.'s then recent Mephisto redesign. When questioned on this by DIX-190, Skynet changes to the form of a founding father and shoots eye lasers at the impudent Terminator. Yeah, we're doing this now. The flamboyant new Skynet sees the mysterious Conrad as a serious threat to the plan, and so will send upgraded Terminators after him. In our retcon, DIX-190 is identified as a near 30-year-old basic Technodyne Terminator Unit 101. In the Jim Cameron movie, Kyle Reese comes from the year 2029 and describes this type of T-800 Terminator as new. In the prior Terminator comics, DIX-190 was tagged as a T-1000, a seeming upgrade from 2 years after Reese's departure. But no, now we have a Terminator 101 being rendered obsolete by Terminator Unit 103, codenamed Goliath. However, Skynet still wants DIX-190 to lead this new cadre, so it is literally torn to pieces and rebuilt as a 103. No, its memory isn't downloaded from the 101 and uploaded into a 103, although why would you want that anyway? You can just give the information gathered by DIX to an entirely new unit and continue to use DIX-190 as you see fit. It was a finely working model. Instead, most of DIX-190 is scrapped and a 103 was built around what remained, a blatant waste of resources, and a compromise to the finished unit. Besides contradicting almost everything established in the movie and prior comics, just within the context of this single comic, why did this have to be a flashback sequence 2 pages into the story? Especially because partway through the present story, there's another page devoted to this process that presumably also occurs in the past. Why? Because the rest of this comic is so boring. We return to Conrad and company 2 days later, which is to say right where we left them, because we're not in the flashback anymore. At least, I hope that's what they meant, and not that we're 48 hours out from the opening sequence that was 48 hours out from the Skynet sequence. Conrad finds a young man trapped in a hole in the woods, lifts him up with one arm, and it's decided that's proof enough that he's alright to be taken to a secret underground base where they're growing new humans. No really, 5 years ago, a guy named Colin Savoy was freed from an Atlanta death camp by John Connor. Noted as a logistical genius, Connor hooked Savoy up with Dr. Hiram Potterwax to address low birth rates among human rebels. They had the idea of growing humans in tanks within a modified seaweed womb using a variation on in vitro fertilization. That way, Connor could get a new generation of rapidly developing child soldiers without all his lady rebels being knocked up and useless in combat. Seriously? I'm barely paraphrasing, and not a second of critical analysis of the moral implications of this is spared. Scouting locations for this proposed baby farm, they happened upon Mort Dizzy World, an elaborate theme park in Orlando, Florida. Nuns had taken up residence there, but on hearing of the plan to create humans through the type of surrogacy recently condemned by Pope Francis as a deplorable form of human trafficking, the nuns jumped at the chance to help. I mean, they literally doffed their habits to wear cleavage-bearing uniforms and take up arms in defense of test tube baby soldiers. That was 3 years ago, when the first batch were born. This included Peter, named after Pan, the teenager Conrad had pulled out of the hole. We learn this after taking a modified version of an It's a Small World type ride involving murals of storks delivering babies. We tour the facility twice, learn how it's powered hydroelectrically, and then we're called back to the vats that looks like the tank's bishop kept facehuggers in. Everyone wants to see the miracle of birth, with Dr. Potterwax reveling in the new life, and Conrad holding the baby while stating life is truly the grandest miracle of all. Is this a comic book or a fake Christian Crisis pregnancy center on newsprint? Continuing the theme of birth and rebirth. And by theme, I mean putting your ear directly on the speaker at a death metal concert. We go back to NORAD and the upgraded DIX-190, who is now built like an elephant with a wired power pack on its back and has wrist lasers embedded in its skin. So much for an infiltration unit. And then the Skynet hologram in the form of the circus ringmaster demands the capture of Conrad for study at NORAD. One of the reasons why people live in poverty conditions while creating comic books is because it's a storytelling medium with an unlimited budget. The only limit is an artist's ability to draw something. So why does this comic feel like a bottle episode with a bunch of characters standing around talking in one location because that's all they could afford? We're paying to see in the comics what couldn't be put on the screen in 1984, yet this is more like V, the television series? Ron Fortier is going to write almost every Now Terminator comic going forward, including one painted by Alex Ross, and this is what he thinks that should entail. Forget you, God help me.
Audio taken from Rich Life Realization Podcast, Discover Your Richest Life, excerpts from the September 19th, 2023 episode, Stories from a Storyteller with Ron Fortier, and the October 2nd, 2023 episode, Your Creative Gift with Ron Fortier.
One of the things that we wanted to both talk about was an experience I had early on in my career, going back to that San Diego Comic Con, right? Because we went over the Terminator. All right. So if your listeners will, go back a little bit, I go to San Diego with the dream of selling the Green Hornet project, which ultimately happened. But at the same time, prior to that, my agent had brought me over to Now Comics. And basically what had happened was they had hired a science fiction writer to write the Terminator comic. Okay? Okay, so as we talked earlier, writing comics and writing prose is two different things. So this gentleman they'd hired to write the comic book had no clue how to write a comic. And he was basically turning scripts that were so word-heavy that there was no room for the art. The artists were going crazy. They didn't want to work with this guy. They hated his scripts, blah, blah, blah. By then, they'd done like 7 or 8 issues. Fans were writing saying they didn't like it. Hey, this was a great movie. We saw it, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, blah, blah, blah. We saw all those movies. This is great. How come this book is so dull and boring? It doesn't make any sense. And so here I am talking with, the publisher, and he's like, well, we need a new writer. Think you'd like a shot at it? And it caught me flat-footed because, again, you have problems, but I'd seen only the first movie come out. I'd seen it and enjoyed it. Okay. Just said, okay, it's great. But I didn't know what else I could do with it. And I gonna let it go. So we go through the rest of the day, that day of the convention. By the time it's all done, we go out to dinner someplace. We end up going upstairs to our room. My wife and I were sitting there, and my wife's all excited because I've just met, a professional company, and they're offering me a job to write a professional comic book that's going to come out every month. And I'm going to get a check for it. I'm going to get paid for writing comics. All right. And so Valerie is wicked excited, but she can sense I'm not. So finally she looks at me, and I basically said, I don't want to write. I don't know what I can do with it. It makes no sense. Yeah. At which point she got really mad. Really mad. I mean, she's not going to throw things, but I could tell. You can see this in her eyes. She lets you know. Okay. To the point where she finally sat down. Look, she goes, this has been your dream all your life. She says, you've gone up and down, backwards and forwards. You've had tons of rejection slips over the years. You've never stopped. Keep plowing away, And she goes, so here we are. We're half a country, we're across the country. We live in New England. She says, we came all this way out for you to write. And you're going to turn down an offer to write a comic, monthly comic. She goes, how do you call yourself a writer? Nail me, it's flat. All right. And she was right. She was 100% right. I didn't have that luxury. Who was I? I was a nobody. I'm the smallest little fish in this big pond. All right. And I want to get out there. And so, okay, you know what? I'll find a way. I'll find a way to make this work for me. So the next day we go back down, and I told the publisher, okay, shook hands. I said, when I get back home, I'll send you some plot ideas. He said, well, before you go. And sure enough, thank you. He gives me the 8 issues they'd already published, which was what I needed. So on the flight home, I was reading those 8 comics and immediately realized what was wrong with them, which again, they'd hired a prose writer who didn't know how to pace the comic. Comic books have to be, because they're visual. You want to see action. You want to see motion. You don't want talking heads. The kiss of death in any comic book is page after page of people talking to each other. All right. And that's what we call talking heads. And that's all he was giving me. Right. I mean, it's amazing to me those with all his artists put on the spot after 8 issues, nothing but this. And the idea is the story took place in the future. So if you remember the first film, right, the Terminators come from the past, including the hero who comes back to destroy him because he wants to kill Sarah Connor, blah, blah, blah. So that first son won't live. First son being John Connor, who fights the Terminators in the future to save mankind. Okay. And so the comic company decided to set the entire story in that future where that's going on. Right? Well, I read those comics, I get home, back to the house. A couple days later, they're sitting on my desk, my office, and I'm sitting there looking through them. And that's when I began to realize, take notes, that all this writer ever done was focused on John Connor. Whereas he's got all these rebels fighting, but he never personalized any of them, not a single one. They're like these faceless guys supposedly go out and get killed or whatever, all right? Just as long as you're on Connor's, all right, and he has the lead role, blah, blah, blah. It's not how you do this. And the second thing is, I got away from the fact that it was science fiction, all right, because I realized, okay, so basically you've got one force fighting another force. And I'm the kid who grew up, post World War II when DC Comics was doing some of the best war comics ever done, because most of GIs came home from World War II and went back to work in the comics, all right, including Joe Cooper, the artist, and Robert Connor. Both were combat veterans of World War II, and they convinced DC to do war comics, one of which was Our Army at War. They created Sergeant Rock and East, which was perhaps the greatest war comic ever done, all right? And the key is Conager's stories were believable. They weren't glorifying war or not. They showed war for how ugly it was. But Conager based his stories on his actual experiences fighting through Europe and defined not only Rock, the hero of the book, but his squad, so that you got to know all of them from issue to issue to issue. You saw their fears, their doubts moving forward constantly. Some of them dying, all right? But it was that emotional hook that pulled you into the story. And I realized that's what Terminator was. It was a comic book. It was a war comic. And if I used Conager's mold and started defining all these guys fighting with John Connors, I would have true applause for the next 6 years with no problems at all. Because I would define all these other characters and we'd get to know them as the series went on. And so just like that, I started writing scripts and getting them done, and literally ended up really enjoying writing that series because I found where the story was hidden.
The May 15th, 1989 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 165. Coming distractions from May 16th through 30th under Now Comics, The Terminator number 12, The Introduction of John Connor by Fortier, Tenney, and others. Color comic, $2.95, ships $5.26. One of those lines seemed oddly familiar. The inside front cover from The Terminator number 12 is a full-page ad. The real Ghostbusters in person with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Slimer. 3 days only, June 30th through July 2nd, the Chicago Comic Convention, Ramada Inn O'Hare Hotel. Free Ghostbusters buttons and posters. By the way, they have 3 T's and buttons. Sponsored by Now Comics and Fujifilm. For more information, call, and they have a phone number. There's also a black and white picture that shows the Ecto-1, what appears to be an inflated Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that's roughly 6 feet tall, male and female Ghostbusters in costume, and a big blow-up Slimer that really doesn't strongly resemble Slimer, who's eating a banner that says Now Comics Ghostbusters. The final interior page, Now Newsflash, talks up all the Now Comics to come. There's a mention also out this month is what all Terminator fans have been craving. Issue 12 is the coming of John Connor in the Terminator Special Anniversary double-sized issue. It may cost a few pennies more, but it is definitely a must-have. And with another killer cover by Mitch O'Connell, see issue number 1. Issue number 12 is a collector's dream. And under on sale now, Terminator 12 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas, Suzanne Dechnick, special double-sized anniversary issue, The Return of John Connor. And then there's an editorial by associate editor Catherine Llewellyn talking about comics readers being sick of the same old stuff and how companies like Now are going to attract audiences beyond the fanboys, blah, blah, blah.
Now Comics had been hyping the arrival of John Connor in their series for months, and sure enough, that's him on the cover of the double-length first anniversary issue. Too bad his appearance requires an explanation, because Mitch O'Connell painted a reddish-blonde bearded man with a mullet. That's John Connor. No, not the dark-haired man with a huge facial scar that we saw in the opening moments of the movie. Now was apparently so terrified of a likeness dispute that they completely altered the look of an extra with no lines, so that the first character from the film to appear in the comic is totally unrecognizable as that character. This guy might as well be Ace Hunter from Megaforce. That at least would be a passable but not actionable resemblance. So after you get past not knowing who that guy on the cover is and start reading the comic, your next realization is that it did not need to be extra length. There are a lot of silent panels and extended dialogues of no importance intended to fill space. The story is titled Night Convoy and introduces Amazon Annie, who is basically a horny furiosa. Annie, born in Marie Welch, drives a heavily reinforced long-haul truck that is guarded exclusively by women on motorcycles. They get names, but they're all functionally the same character. The only standout is Johnny Go, because she likes killing Terminators, and gets a solo segment later. As for Amazon Annie, she's prone to French-kissing men upon meeting them, even ones like Conrad that turn out to be androids. After her initial shock at learning the truth, Annie still seems amenable to intimate relations with appliances. And on that inappropriate tip, Peter the test tube baby expects that he's probably the father of one of the new batch. Last issue, it seemed like this was more like contributing cells to a cloning process, but here they get shockingly explicit about fertilizing with semen. Peter is about 15 years old, and in context, unfortunately named. But it gets worse, because Peter points out that every person that can produce sperm contributes, and that Tim Reese will likely be expected to do the same. Tim is somewhere between 11 and 14 years old, and very enthused about helping make a baby. And in case you want to chalk this up to boys literally being barely nubile boys, Colin Savoy turns up to gleefully encourage them, pointing out that even Sister Claire helps make the babies. If that didn't creep you out, it's also pointed out that these are new humans with all flaws genetically removed, so we're advocating for eugenics at this point. Another thing is that nobody talks about rapid growth, acting like Peter wasn't conceived in a lab 3 years ago. Seemingly, the current batch are all Uber babies that will have to be raised in full by adopted parents before being conscripted for battle. The Amazons are here to redistribute the babies to the happiest homes possible in a post-nuclear holocaust. Because they're tight with John Connor, Conrad and Tom asked to come with. I just described 13 story pages. There's a CB system that allows the nurses watching over the babies in the temperature-controlled shipping container to communicate with the cab to help coordinate shift changes. That's 2 more pages there. Feral scavengers create a blockade in one of the cities they pass through, but the Amazons ram it and press on. 5 pages. The Amazons sleep during the day to avoid detection. 2 pages. Johnny Go and Tim Reese scout ahead, where they find the new Goliath Terminators torturing some rebels for information. The pair are detected and captured. 7 pages. DIX-190 wants to capture Conrad, so he uses Tim as bait. He releases Johnny Go to communicate with Conrad, presenting to the android Tim's severed tongue to show DIX means business. That's right, the young star of this book, and the little brother of the movie's hero. The kid with a distinct personality, often used to interact with other kids, who asked lots of questions, as kids do, setting up most of the series' exposition. And this happens after the previous issue where Conrad had to act like he was in an infomercial to facilitate all that expo dumping. I've got all these archival interviews where Ron Fortier tells us what a gift for writing he has. And he makes the fatal rookie mistake of taking the voice of the main character for momentary shock value. But then again, this issue also wrote out Tama, the old indigenous woman who spoke in English so broken that you'd have cheered her tongue being removed. Not for nothing, also the only character of color to appear in these past 2 issues. And there sure are a lot of new folks for them to be exclusively Caucasian while working on a flawless breeding pool. Maybe I should have been looking out for a Tucker Carlson cameo? Despite the abundance of women, there's no refrigeration in the killer robot future, so we'll just have to use Tim's tongue to motivate the established android altruist to action. Conrad is supposed to come alone, which would have gotten Tim killed, but a regretful Johnny Go snuck up to snipe Terminators. However, without the element of surprise, the advantage remains with the Terminators. But then John Connor showed up with his forces and wiped them out. Yes, even DIX-190, who had been upgraded to lead a squad of new super tough Goliath Terminators hyped up throughout the last issue. Pew pew. Super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Before he was killed in one panel, DIX-190 made a crack about how children should be seen and not heard. It's swell for Timmy that aside from a smudge of blood at the side of his mouth, there's no significant physical or emotional trauma to address following a killer robot ripping an organ out of his pie hole. And Tim Reese is super excited to meet John Connor, because he wants to ask him so many questy, oh, right, Never mind then. At least Tim doesn't have to worry about Amazon Annie's surprise French kissing him now, though he might still need help with that sperm sample. Hasn't the boy given enough to the cause at this point?
This month's terminal data switches to black pages with white text, including the negative version of black and white artwork from a panel featured earlier in the issue. Catherine Llewellyn mentions that as far as a graphic novel goes, there are none on the near horizon, but for all you many people out there who are missing issues 1 through 5 in your collections, we produced a Terminator trade paperback reprinting those issues. Look for it on the shelves a week or so after its ship date, which is August the 11th. To my knowledge, that book never came into existence. I cannot find any record of it anywhere. The only Terminator material that was ever collected in trade paperback was The Burning Earth, both contemporaneously and twice over after the expiration of Now Comics. There's also a reply from Catherine here where she states, "I'm not sure that reprogramming the Terminators would work. Don't they receive their commands directly from Skynet? If so, wouldn't that make them simply computer terminals rather than reservoirs for data? It's a good idea though, and I'm going to check into it with the Terminator know-it-all, Ron Fortier." Apparently Jim Cameron had a different idea about how that was going to work based on Terminator 2.
One of the things in high school was like, here I am writing all these essays because I want to be a writer, and I'm doing extra essays to work and enjoying doing that. But to be quite honest, I struggled with grammar and I struggled with spelling. So this one nun I'm telling you about was my mentor, right? One day after class, I stayed after class and everybody gone out. I'm like, I'm a little frustrated. She goes, "What's the matter?" And I went, "Well, this is, how am I going to be a writer of grammar, right? Or like I'm misspelling this or that, right?" And she started to grin. She goes, "That's not your skill." And remember when we talked about the technicals, right? When we talked about the technicals, she goes, "What?" She goes, "You're a storyteller. Don't worry about it." She goes, "When you sit down to write your story to the best of your ability, that's your gift." She says, "You'll find plenty of editors who do the mistakes and the grammar, pull polish on that big deal, but it's your gift to tell a story. That's yours." So again, wouldn't you know, I meet a girl, fall in love and get married, who's good at grammar and spelling. So Val becomes my first reader. Every writer should have it. Stephen King wrote his book about writing. Tabitha, his wife, is his first reader. Okay? You always need that person who's going to read what you've done, most likely within minutes after you've finished it, all right, and go through it with a technical eye, all right, not get caught emotionally or whatever. And Valerie will never just pat me on the back and say, "Oh, this is good," whatever. No, she's reading it to see if it's a good story. She finds the misspellings and she finds the grammar mistake. And she read tens of it or whatever. And the next day when I start working, she gives it back. I make those corrections and go back and tell them the story. Every so often I'll stop and say, "What do you think of the story?" Because I appreciate her perspective and input. And so that led to that bit where the plot being this young 18-year-old fighter for John Connors gets caught by the Terminator. And so they're torturing him to tell where John Connors and his men have their secret base. But he won't tell because he's a tough kid. He hopes they'll eventually come to rest. And as I'm writing it, I'm like caught in this little conundrum. Well, these are soulless machines. They're going to torture this kid, all right? But they're not going to get it, Bruce. All right, I'll have him cut off a finger, all right, to make it tough. And I write that part of the script, finish it, and I hand it to Valerie. So she's in the bedroom reading it, and I'm just waiting in my office to get some feedback. And I'm thinking, oh, she's going to really flip out when she sees I cut his finger off. She comes back in the office and goes, "Nah." I said, "Now what?" She goes, "They cut off his finger." I said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "They cut off his tongue." And I just looked at my jaw. She goes, "What talking? They cut off his tongue." And of course, it made all the sense in the world. It did. All right, it's gross and violent, but that's what they would have done. So I altered the script. They cut off the kid's tongue, right? And before they can do anything else, Connors and the team eventually come and say, "Yeah, his tongue's gone." All right. So two things come from that. Number one, it makes for a better story. She understood that. And she got it. She made me realize it as well. For number two, I'm left with the character still an active member of the storyline, of the plots of the characters. Now he can't talk and becomes an even better character. All right. Which was a challenge as a writer to do him justice when he can't communicate like the other, right? And now he evolves into this other. So again, the epilogue of this little anecdote is that following year we're at this San Diego. I was sitting at the booths, right? And I'm autographing Terminator Angry. And Valerie's sitting behind me with the publisher and editor. This young teenage boy comes up with copies of the Terminator, puts them in front of me, and I'm signed, right? So I said, "You enjoying the series?" "Oh, yeah." He said, "When they cut off Billy's tongue, that was so cool." So I look over my shoulder at my wife, and she's like, don't tell me weaker sex, okay? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
Excerpt from the June 1st, 1989, cover dated Amazing Heroes number 166. Coming distractions for June 1st through 15th. Now Comics offers Terminator number 13, special no dialogue issue, color comic, $1.75, ships in June. Newsline. Now launches Green Hornet comic book. He's probably the most famous superhero not to come out of the comics, and now has got him. The Green Hornet is coming to comics in July. The first 6 issues of the series will trace the genealogy of the Hornet from the 30s, the original radio incarnation, to the present. After that, we'll be introduced to the modern GH and his faithful and female sidekick, Kato. Jeff Butler will pencil, Ron Fortier will write, and Jim Steranko has been commissioned to paint the cover to issue number 1. The premiere issue will be 48 pages and cost $2.95. The first anniversary issue of The Terminator will be a double-sized 48-page issue featuring John Connor, the often referred to but never before seen hero of the Humans Revolution. It'll be written by Fortier, penciled by Thomas Tenney, and inked by returning inker Brian Thomas. Mitch O'Connell contributes the cover. The issue will sell for $2.95. Now we'll be releasing their 3-issue adaptation of Ghostbusters 2 in June to coincide with the film's release. The first issue will be released on the same day as the film, June 16th, and the other 2 issues will follow over the next 2 weeks. The adaptation is being done in the same style as the real Ghostbusters cartoon and comic book. James Van Heist will adapt the script, John Tobias pencils, Rich Rankin inks, and Suzanne Dechnik contributes painted color. This miniseries is separate from Now's regular real Ghostbusters title. On sale now, Terminator 13 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas, Tom Gianni. Read from the journals of Timothy Reese, Mexico in the year 2067. This month's Now Newsflash focuses on the video release of Speed Racer, Ralph Snart memorabilia from Graffiti Designs, the launch of the Green Hornet comic, a little talk about Real Ghostbusters at Chicago Comic-Con, and the upcoming Little Monsters adaptation.
The Terminator is a book that almost from the very beginning jumped the shark, saddled it, and proceeded to jump other sharks from atop its back. I guess I shouldn't be surprised then that Fortier quintupled down on my criticisms of the previous issue. In fact, he effectively ends the series at Unlucky 13, even though it will zombie walk another 4 issues. So, the first 10 pages are Skynet monologuing to itself, rationalizing why it decided to exterminate humanity. It relates a sort of machine depression over its lack of purpose after nuking the Earth, and how it got out of its funk when survivors came out of the wreckage so that Skynet could kill some more. There's a vague superficial condemnation of mankind's self-destructive impulses, nationalism, and religious zealotry, using this to justify genocide as a form of serving humanity's deepest unspoken wish for oblivion. There's also a lot of hard-selling John Connor as Skynet's nemesis, even though his role in the book is barely more than a cameo, admittedly. Never actually doing anything substantial with the messianic figure is par for the franchise, but it's also an indication of the rapid decay of the title's ongoing narrative. In the end, Skynet is revealed to have a literal god complex, seeing itself as the creator of the evolution of dominant life on Earth with its Terminators. Feeling isolated, Skynet shed a holographic tear. I wish that I was joking. I took a few days off from writing this synopsis because I knew this was a rabbit hole that could fill the rest of the episode, and I'd rather use my human voice to get into that with a guest later, rather than add another episode to the half-dozen allotted to the Now Comics run. Later for now, let's say, and we're not even into the weird part that ruins the book. I'd already written this issue off as a reiteration of what came before via a painfully contrived perspective, but without warning, an adult Tim Reese takes over the rest of the issue. The whole book is hand-lettered, but where Skynet used caption boxes, Tim's print is larger and runs loose at the bottom of each spiral tablet-shaped panel. I hope the artist only ruled out a few of those and stacked them over and over again, because I'd hate to think he drew a new one each time. I'm going to limit the scope of the synopsis, because a bunch of new characters, and one returning one, are introduced over this story that leads into not the rest of this series, but rather the Burning the Earth miniseries. The short version is that John Connor recognized that he was a high-value target that would attract Skynet attention, so he chose to make a stand on the city block where young glossectomy victim Timmy had been saved from the destroyed primary foil of the book since number 6. Johnny Go and another unnamed Amazon were sent away to rejoin the baby convoy, even though you'd think Skynet would have eyes on the scene that could follow them. But I'm not tactical genius John Connor, so what do I know? Then Connor's Grizzlies, aided by the young Timmy, blow up the forces sent against them. The end. No, seriously, I haven't stopped short. The story ends just as Tim enters the battle, with the postscript from the journals of Timothy Reese, Mexico, 2067. Now, there's no military time of 2067, so I have to assume this is being written 36 years into the future. My understanding is that the Burning Earth takes place about a decade after the series cover stated 2031 setting. Despite the debut story taking place in December of that year and having progressed several months in story time. What this means is that Tim has plot armor extending beyond the furthest point of any Terminator media that I'm familiar with and expanding to the survival of humanity as a whole. So in the back of your mind, if you're ever worried that you're witnessing the last stand of mankind in a series centered on that essential conflict, you can always relieve that dramatic tension by remembering that a middle-aged mustachioed Tim will still be journaling by candlelight far into the future. But yeah, Tim is gone until the spin-off. He got Rick Grimes'd. Also, this book has the only cover to feature Tim and Conrad, a washed-out mess of yellows and oranges that can barely be deciphered as two humanoids running from a fire. I haven't read The Burning Earth yet, but to my knowledge, Conrad was left out of it. Again, arguably the second lead of the series, barely figures into the final issue featuring him. So from here on out, I hope you like Sarah's slammers and loose threads, because that's all you're getting. By the way, John Connor's nickname is the Golden Bear and his team is Connor's Grizzlies. Somehow, that wasn't stupid enough to rate a mention earlier, as these issues melted my brain.
With issue 13, the terminal data is now back to black ink, printed on baby blue background. It's not as dark as it was for the previous issue, so it's a little easier on the eyes. I actually didn't mind the negative for the black and white issue. I'm talking about the editorial material. There's a note that sharp-eyed country music fans may notice that the Oak Ridge Boys' faces were hidden in a pile of rocks in issue 10. Excerpt from The Short Box, a comic book talk show, episode 282, Force Works with Thomas Tenney, published on March 25th, 2020.
I thought I had made it right out the bat after Robotech, because Robotech was a very big selling comic. People didn't realize that it was like, anime wasn't that big at the time. Robotech really ignited the fuse for what you see today. And I think Robotech deserves that credit for igniting the fuse, because people were buying anime after Robotech. And I thought, well, great. Came on the tail end of the finishing Robotech, and then here I'm doing Terminator. And Terminator, when I got into the Terminator series, it was falling apart on the series. So they came in, and I actually co-wrote issue 2, and people don't know that, of Terminator, because I wasn't credited with it, because we had no writer on issue 2. We had no writer, and it was basically a free-for-all. And I thought, okay, well, I made it here, but then my deadlines were insane. Yeah, Paul Gulacy did some work on the covers, and he did a cover, and Paul's a great artist. It was an incredible artist. It was a call by Now to do the painted covers. They really were up and down with it about doing the covers, me doing the covers for it, because they were like, well, we got all these artists that want to get involved in Terminator. So I was like, well, we'll give them the covers. I was like, I don't have a problem with that. You know, fine with me. It's one less thing I have to worry about right now on this tight deadline. And I'm not going to go over the history of Now Comics, but it was when I got to Marvel, and this was thanks to Rich Rankin. Rich Rankin, my inker from the Robotech days, Kamiko, had done what he could do, and he was the one that said, you're going to go to Marvel. And Rich was the one who took my work to Marvel and said, here, look at this. And it was when I had those 2 phone calls within 15 minutes that I felt that I had made it. Yeah, it was a jump. But see, at the same time, people weren't going to take. I thought a lot of people weren't going to take, because you can get stereotyped. And doing anime art, I was starting to feel like I was Adam West.
July 1st, 1989, cover dated Amazing Heroes number 168's coming distractions. Reference the upcoming Fright Night, Racer X, Ralph's Nerd Adventures, Real Ghostbusters, Rust, Slimer, Speed Racer, and Terminator number 14, but had no solicitation copy. The only title from Now that did have copy was Green Hornet number 1. There's no terminal data in issue number 14. There is a Now newsflash, this time back to the canary yellow background and black text, again pimping Green Hornet. There's also an image from the Little Monsters book. They talk about the Fred Savage Howie Mandel vehicle at some length. They obviously thought this was going to be a bigger deal than it actually was. As for on sale now, Terminator 14 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas. Sarah Slammers crash their HK in the ocean and sink to the bottom. They are okay, but can they swim?
Every cover of Now Comics The Terminator ongoing series features the banner text along the top. It's 2031, and the battle continues. As I previously mentioned, the series started in the last week of December 2031, and months have passed, plus the moon colonists were waiting for a return ship a year out from being stranded on Earth, so it would most definitely be 2032 at this point. But in light of Tim Reese aging decades as his story advanced toward the 2070s, there's a comfort in going back to being just the 1 year off. Also, the banner has never been more true, because the story is circa 2031, and the Battle of Sarah's Slammers finally continues, as they take back the reins of the book they started for the rest of its run. It just so happens that they're running out the clock, so if you're hoping for a big payoff, set your expectations more towards season finale of a bubble show, involving a sweeps week stunt that backfires, where the entire back end gets eaten up by a weird tangent storyline. Plus, the series lead's contracts were up and they were getting better offers elsewhere. Conrad Farner is credited with the cover painting. He was presumably named after the Swiss intellectual, because same spelling, but there was also a mid-century art historian by that name. Maybe the same guy. I'm translating these pages by Google, and there isn't much to read. The comic book Conrad Farner only has a handful of credits for Now covers, including Terminator No.11's Skynet Hologram Circus Ringmaster 1. He did a striking but unfortunate piece for the first issue of the second volume of Racer X involving multiple Confederate flags, pump-action shotguns, and a skull. It looks like something Glenn Fabry would have done for Hellblazer, but instead it's for Edgelord Speed Racer. Most of the rest are really nice portraits, so it's too bad Tony Caputo probably stiffed him and soured him on the comics market. This cover is of a very Cold War Russian submarine captain, complete with sailor cap and white turtleneck, glaring down at the reader with a hammer and sickle painted on a background wall. As I mentioned, weird tangent ahoy. We're picking up after Sarah Slammer's second successful attempt to halt a Skynet space shuttle launch intended to destroy the lunar colony. The hunter-killer aircraft that they were flying in crashed into the Gulf of Mexico, recalling in very poor taste the ultimate fate of the Challenger crew just 3 years earlier. The ship silently sinks for more than one page, the Slammers trapped inside as the air runs out and water runs in. The group bickers among themselves over what to do, as Commander Leahy has been knocked unconscious by bleeding head trauma. There's an ill-timed discussion of Essie's pregnancy reconciliations. They're filming a soap opera as they're capsizing. Cut to a 3-page interlude in a Florida city where a black cat is hunting a mouse. Then the mouse's friends gang up on the cat. Then a man grabs a board and helps fight off the mice, stamping on one with his shoe in a now rare moment of gooey blood spray. This is the now self-described Crazy Defard, out roaming the streets since eloping from the cavalry guys. Remember when I assumed Iron Horse Adams was blowing off Defard's escape at his peril? Last appearance. He just walks off into the moon set cradling the injured cat. Cut back to Sarah's submerged slammers, with a stingray swimming past and faint strains of Sebastian the Crab singing Under the Sea. Everybody's still gabbing like the air isn't getting stale and sparse. Doyle, the T2 Sarah Connor main lady prototype with the Windsor sunglasses, turns out to be Aurora-level claustrophobic and has to be physically restrained from, I guess being hysterical. One of the big problems is that the pressures of the deep are keeping them in. Maybe instead of talking her down, the undead big black guy Slager should have turned her loose. Commander Leahy finally woke up after 7 or 8 hours, when the water was up to their crotches, and was like, what about the so, and Essie was like, of course, the doohickey. I guess that's why he's in charge. So they make Slager do the abyss part of the didn't we get the license to anything Jim Cameron, and manages to open the Doom off logger. By the way, for such an anonymous background character that I thought was redshirt early on, Slager is rendered as physically enormous now. He's as big as the Goliath Terminators. You can't miss him. Anyway, now everybody does the abyss, swimming through murky green water for about 5 silent pages, give or take a panel. Lucky for them there were scuba divers outside to guide them to a secret Soviet submarine that has been operating out of Cuba for 30-odd years. It's mostly manned by Cubans, some of whom were essentially born on the thing. Sarah's slammers are made to strip to be scanned to make sure that they don't have endoskeletons. And then all the men are given the same matching white turtlenecks to meet Captain Rostov of the Sea Wind.
Hey guys, Eric here, and welcome to episode number 199 of the Why I Love Comics podcast, in which I was joined by a very good friend, mentor, and just all-around awesome guy, Ron Fortier, who some of you might know.
So it's not unusual for me to be at a pulp show and have fans come come up to my table with some of my old comics and asking me to autograph them and stuff like that. Look, I love it. Okay, it flatters me to no end. I'm always happy to do it. And like you said, it's always a surprise to see which comics fans end up handing me. For the most part, I generally get a lot of the greenhorns because they sold extremely well for Now Comics, and they published a lot of them. And I get quite a few of the early Terminator books or whatever. It's the odd little comics that I've done over the years, Eric, that are very rare to find. And every now and then there'll be a fan who'll show up at one of these shows and, like you did that time, surprise me, because it's like, you mean these things are still out there? Somebody still can find them? And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the earliest short stories I ever wrote and sold at the start of my career. Now, this was the number one short story I sold. I sold it to the now defunct Eclipse Comics, and it was a short story, and it was called Kerrigan's Camera. It was a short little horror story. They bought it for all $35, I think, and they published it. And I'm trying to think, oh God, who was the artist? He went on to a really excellent career in the business, and now I'm drawing a blank on who his name is, but he was an up-and-coming young professional himself. And so that was my one and only sale to Eclipse Comics. It appeared in like one of their, anthology titles, Eclipse Tales of Terror or some such thing, okay? And to this day, I don't know how many were printed, but very few people even know that exists. So you can imagine my surprise when I'm sitting there at a convention and somebody will come up and say, here, you remember this? And they hold up a copy of that comic book. And I'm like, oh my God, because I'm almost forgotten that I wrote it to you. Understand? It's just like, God, this is going back now 40 something years, if not longer. And I'll flip through it and there's that story, and it looks absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely great to see it again after all these years. And it's such a thrill to be able to autograph that for people.
July 15th, 99, cover dated Amazing Heroes number 169. Coming distractions for August. Again, no copy for any of the Now comics, including Terminator number 15. Just noted that it's by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas, and Suzanne Dechnik. Ships August 25th. The last interior page, Now Newsflash, is printed in bright orange, pumpkin orange with black text because Tony Caputo hates my eyeballs. New on sale now, Terminator 15 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas, Sarah Slammers head for Cuba to save the habitat, but there's mutiny ahead. As for the Now Newsflash, there's a thing out now that I think you all should know about. It's a little thing called a magazine. It's a little thing called the Now What. It's new, it's cool, and it's all about Now Comics. The Now What magazine is 16 full-color pages of preview artwork, rare and unpublished artwork, interviews, info, facts, articles, opinions, letters, what's on sale coverage, and more. What? Now What has photo covers, always, pull-out pinups, news briefs on what's happening in and about now, what's happening with the artists, the writers, the stories, and you, the readers. Intrigued, but not willing to dish out any dough for it because you'd rather spend your pennies on the comics? That's cool, because we know and understand and agree. That's why the Now What is free. Completely free. There is a catch, but a very minor one. There are only two places you can get the Now What. The first is at your local comic specialty shops. Not really sure what that means? That means it is not a newsstand, but a store. A store that sells comics, comic novelties, comic trade publications, etc. Easy to find. Unless you live in the real sticks, there's undoubtedly a comic shop in your area. Normally listed in the yellow pages under used books, periodicals, specialty shops. But wait, you're saying? I live in the real sticks. Well, that's okay too, because the only other way to get the Now What is by becoming a monthly subscriber to any one of Now Comics titles. That's right. Now What comes free every month in that little brown envelope that brings your favorite comic. So I guess what I'm saying is that, although buying comics on the newsstand is convenient, and that is certainly why we are on newsstand, for the sporadic buyer, being a regular reader and gung-ho comic fan has its advantages. By the way, they spell gung-ho with an E. Now Comics would like everyone to be religiously regular, and we'd like to give it to those who are a little something extra. I like how they're going to give it to the hoes. Also, random placement of a comma there. Issue 1 came out last month, and it's highly possible that you can still get it. Issue 1 features an exclusive interview with Mark Hansen, creator, artist, writer of Ralph Snart Adventures. It's also got 2 pages of rare Ralph Snart art from Volume 1, Number 1, a pinup that won't be found anywhere else, a preview of upcoming miniseries, Little Monsters, plus, this month in Now What, it's Ghostbusters 2, the film, the comic, the craze, and, for some reason they keep doing that, plus, exclamation point, and, exclamation point, a preview of the all-new Terminator 5-issue miniseries. Meet the artist, see the art, read the preview of the Terminator, The Burning Earth.
Less than a quarter of the Now Comics Terminator stories, really just one miniseries, has ever been reprinted. That's actually not that uncommon common for Terminator comics, since only Dark Horse and Dynamite prioritized trade paperback collections. The last publisher to make a substantial investment in the license let it go in 2019, when Dark Fate flopped, and there hasn't been a new Terminator comic published since 2020. However, with the surge of robust hardcover oversized omnibus editions in recent years, even for material with complex rights issues, surely somebody could have collected all of the Now material in a single comprehensive edition. That is, if there was demand for such a thing. Even among die-hard comics collectors, nostalgia for Now Terminator is a minority's minority. I'm sure one of many factors is that Now couldn't even get the covers right. Issues number 2, 3, and 9 are simply not professional caliber work. 8 of the 17 issues of the ongoing series have covers that do not successfully indicate that the book is even about the Terminators from the movie. For instance, would you consider sunglasses to be enough to communicate that the Jungle Warrior on number 4 is a Terminator? The swamp soldiers with the featureless masks on number 6 look like they're from George Romero's The Crazies, or one of the many Vietnam War-themed books of the time. A cowboy, a sideshow hologram, a lunar colony synthetic wearing a poker visor, a Russian submarine captain, and an unrecognizable off-model John Connor were on the past 5 covers. The one before that relies on a broad caricature of Arnold Schwarzenegger to grasp vainly at Terminatorosity, and that was one of the butt ugly ones. At 5 paces, all that you can tell it is bad. The cover to number 15 is by Corey Kammer in his sole comic industry credit. It features an unmistakable battle-damaged T-800 cyborg lifting an armed man off the ground by the collar near an alley. In the foreground, a woman in a jumpsuit crawls on the ground toward a pistol. Both her necklace and graffiti in the background seem to connect the humans to Connor's grizzlies, although they're not featured in this issue. It's not a great cover, and in fact recalls some of the foreign Terminator knockoffs, but at least it's a competent one. A child could tell that. At minimum, it wants you to think this is a Terminator comic, if maybe a bootleg one. Corey Kammer is not a common name, so I have to assume that this is the same guy who went on to create the sprawling hybrid tabletop strategy/role-playing game system The Witchborn. As best as I can tell, the premise is, what if Tolkien character types fought Deadites, except they drink blood? Instead of assigning a game master, narration comes through a phone app, so that as many as 6 players can be guided in adventures. Kammer is the president and creative director at the Witchborn Corporation, seemingly designing the game and providing all of the very good fantasy art. Everything looks top-tier professional, so he seems to have done well for himself.
Hi, I'm Corey. Welcome to the Witchborn. Witchborn is a dark fantasy. It combines miniatures and role-playing in a way that doesn't easily fit into any category. I want to tell stories in a continuing campaign of adventures. Now, when anyone dies, they become Witchborn. Even in-game, even your own guys can turn on you. The change is called the Quickening, and a Witchborn spirit fills the corpse. It comes back faster, smarter, and stronger than it was in life, with an insatiable thirst for your blood. You have to burn your own guys just to stop them from turning on you. So enter perdition with us and discover this dark fantasy world.
The actual story, See Cuba and Die, is by the usual suspects. This late in the game, I'm not going to get bogged down in the details, even if the writer plainly is. The original plan was for the Burning Earth to be incorporated into the ongoing series, so that the book would shift from drawing to painted art, and maybe back again. Alex Ross had to cheat on the painting because of the monthly schedule, but the series that followed was also painted, quasi or otherwise. That one was by a different writer though, so it's unclear whether it was its own thing, or intended to launch a second volume. My point is that it seems like Ron Fortier was either laying track to return to this period after a time jump tangent, or was burning off ideas he had, but wouldn't get to explore in this run. So the first 5 pages are devoted to the brutal working conditions for humans forced to help build Terminators out of repurposed auto factories in Detroit, plus a resistance cell in that area. These people are named. They're taking on the mission of stopping production of the new Goliath models, and maybe they're in the last issue I haven't read and won't be covering this episode. The actual story is Captain Rostov chronicling the revised mission of the Sea Wind submarine in the decades it has operated out of Cuba. In particular, they helped to build and maintain an underwater base dubbed Habitat, where they've taken Cuban and Latin survivors to build a small, safe civilization. Despite these Russian sailors having been doing this for almost as long as this comic has been out of print, Seaman Skorbovich decides that now is the time to demand at gunpoint that they finally return to the homeland of Mother Russia. This despite assurances that Russia was well and truly nuked to oblivion in their absence, and most people would have either acted or made peace with the circumstance after 3 decades. Which brings us to a problem that I alluded to earlier. The scene involves a room full of action figures from the same mold wearing mostly matching outfits under dramatic lighting having a violent confrontation. The captain wasn't even wearing his cap at the dining table while telling his tale, so it's nigh identical, brown-haired, bearded Russians doing the Spider-Man pointing at himself meme in a Spider-Verse of yoked dudes and turtlenecks. Tom Slager takes a bullet for the captain that he just met, but the coloring is a dramatic monochrome red, and Slager does not have African-American features, so he's just a third bearded guy to be confused with the captain and mutineer. I had to sit here and methodically parse out who was who for myself, or how else could I explain it to you? But anyway, a loyal Cuban girl stabbed the bad guy in the back, and Slager was saved by onboard surgeon. Wow, this boat has everything. Back in Cuba, Skynet is going full IDF on Gaza, engaging in a holocaust to locate and conclusively destroy the underground network that has long eluded them. And if you thought that comparison was in poor taste, it's certainly not as bad as the media not bringing it up every day that a U.S. ally is using U.S. arms to commit genocidal war crimes. But whatever, the climate crisis will wipe us out in 100 years anyway, so what's now versus later in the long run of the planet of the cockroaches? And now is no time to take the horrific stakes of this fictional apocalypse seriously, because grade school Spanglish exclamations herald the arrival of the Metal Warrior. What does that mean? The Cubans have an Iron Man. A dude in a silver segmented armored suit with wrist cannons plays punch face with Terminators. That's just what this book is, folks.
There's a nice ad in issue 15 for Terminator the Burning Earth. This is the one where you see Terminators running around with pulse rifles from Aliens. There's a full-page illustrated ad for the new Ralph Snart t-shirt. There's another baby blue terminal data. Kath Llewellyn starts with, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The bad news is issue number 16 is the last regular issue of the Terminator. Thomas Tenney will be leaving us, and we bid him a very heartfelt goodbye, and we wish him all the luck in the world. I won't tell you what happens in next month's issue, but I can tell you that it's all action and a great big tearjerker. Issue number 17 of the Terminator, while still a part of the regular monthly, is a fill-in issue by Ron Fortier and Robin Ator, Death, Blood, and Guts. That's the good news. The real good news is Now Comics is planning a 5-issue miniseries, beginning where issue number 18 would be, entitled The Terminator, The Burning Earth. The miniseries picks up 10 years after the last issue, number 17, of The Terminator. This, I can assure you, will be the hottest thing to hit the shelves this winter, and probably all year. Written by Ron Fortier, the series takes place after Skynet has decided it's through playing games, and simply wants to wipe out all of mankind. The first issue, spelled with 3 S's, opens in a war-torn, post-nuclear hellhole called Earth. Only a handful of people are alive. John Connor reappears, and by his side is Tim Reese, now a strong warrior. These are the only 2 characters that cross over from the original Terminator. The reason I'm telling you all of this is that for quite some time now, Ron Fortier has been hungry for some serious response, and he's asked me to place his plea with you. So put those pens and pencils to paper, because we would all like this miniseries to be what you would like it to. What I can guarantee is more death, a much darker, gloomier, destructed planet Earth, and a very bittersweet ending to the whole mess. The rest, I'm afraid, is up to you.
Another book like that I think catches people by surprise because they're not aware that I did it. But again, in the early stages of my career, I actually wrote an origin story of Popeye the Sailor for a little, really small little independent company out of Rhode Island called Ocean Comics. And Ben Dunn, the artist from Texas, who's had quite a career with his own Antarctic press, was the artist on that book. And we actually told the origin story of Popeye the Sailor. And I absolutely, that was one of the most enjoyable projects that I ever worked on. And Ben's art was so appropriate for the style and the humor of the book. And it's out there, but finding a copy of it, Eric, is really, really tough and rare to do. Because again, it was a small independent publisher. Every now and then I'll get emails from people online who are diehard Popeye collectors who've just discovered it. And I have pictures of the cover on my website. So I'll get, what's that picture? What's that book? What's that? I never saw that. When'd you do that? And then they go hunting. They go hunting online and conventions and whatever. And it makes me laugh because I believe there are copies of some of these really rare little books that I did up on eBay and stuff like that if you've got the time and the effort to go hunting them up. But again, they're rarities. They're hard to find, and they command a pretty buck. So there you go.
Excerpt from the September 1989 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 171. This is a painted Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cover with an advertisement for King Hell in the background. So I don't know if Rick Veitch had anything to do with the actual. Yeah, he's the painter of the cover. I see his credit there at the bottom. Newsline. Fanagore Press, Now Comics announced videotape releases. 2 comics publishers are presenting videotapes through the comic shop market. Caputo Publishing, the parent company of Now Comics, has formed a new division, Now Video USA. Now Video will debut with the release of the Speed Racer Video Library Collection. Caputo Publishing will only be distributing these videos through the comic shop, direct market, and direct mail. They will not be available through video rental outlets. Each tape will be released in a limited edition of 10,000. Each tape contains 2 episodes of the cartoon, telling one complete story. The first 3 tapes will be The Great Plan, the first Speed Racer episode, and the only episode in the series to have been previously released on video. The Mammoth Car and the Fastest Car on Earth, co-starring Racer X. Each tape runs about an hour and costs $19.95. Now Video is planning another set of 3 tapes for Christmas. There's also the blurb. The first issue of the adaptation of the Vestron film Little Monsters has been pushed back a month. It will now ship September 29th. Little Monsters will also be a 3-issue limited series adapting the film, not an ongoing series as previously announced. I think they actually had 5 total issues released. Coming distractions for December, Now Comics offers Fright Night number 14 and 15, Green Hornet number 3, Little Monsters 1 and 2, Racer X 4 and 5, Ralph Start 15 and 16, Real Ghostbusters 17, Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters number 8 and 9, Speed Racer number 28, and listed here is Terminator number 15 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, and Brian Thomas, color comic, $1.75, ships in September. Chronologically, this should probably be 16, so I'm wondering if maybe Terminator was delayed. As I've mentioned before, I don't think these books were coming out on time, regardless of what some sources would state. Also, Now listings in general are going to get real squirrely going forward, particularly with regards to the Terminator. There are going to be months where they don't list anything, and then they'll start listing Burning Earth number 4 or 5. Edition number 16, this one features a color ad for Fesser's Quest, the Sunsoft Nintendo Addams Family game. There's a nice screen cap of Lurch saying, "You rang." I think throughout the Terminator run, there's been ads for CBIC, Comic Back Issue Company. I don't know for a fact, but I've suspected that they had some affiliation with Now Comics, and they always solicit with a spotlight on Now Comics. I don't recall ever seeing CBIC ads in any of their comic book companies' wares, but usually it's on like the inside back cover or front cover sometimes, and in black and white. This is the only issue I remember seeing it in color, and nicely enough, they have a color stat of Mitch O'Connell's Terminator number 1 in here. There's also a full-page color ad for the What Now caper, this hour-long promotional video that was created for Now Comics. I've watched it. It's not something you want to submit yourself to, but you can see it for free on YouTube if you like. They were actually trying to charge people $30 for this promotional tape. Despite being the penultimate issue of the series, there is no terminal data in this issue. On sale now, The Terminator number 16 by Ron Fortier, Thomas Tenney, Brian Thomas. The battle in Cuba may be the end of the Slammers. Doyle takes on an army of Terminators and a man-made fighting machine called the Metal Warrior. The Now Newsflash again promotes the What Now caper, reproduces in black and white the same Neil Hansen art that we saw a few pages prior in the full color ad. Also on the horizon is the Terminator, the Burning Earth 5-issue miniseries within a series. Beginning this December, the regular monthly Terminator will go through a complete overhaul. The book will be fully painted by Alexander Ross, and the storyline will jump ahead 10 years. Still written by Ron Fortier, the miniseries will prove to be much darker, more apocalyptic, and more violent. Skynet has decided to end its game with the human race and rid the world of mankind once and for all. It launched a devastating Champaign, Champain, with one goal, complete annihilation. Now an old man, John Connor sets out to give the metal machines one last fight. And then there's more promotion for the Little Monsters comic book.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, the Terminator number 16 shipped on October 5th, 1989, bearing a January cover date. However, its cited reference for the date was just an edition of Comic Shop News, and there are indications that it shipped late. Now's on sale titles listed don't help, since the multi-sourced Green Hornet number 1 was supposed to hit stands in July, yet Slimer number 9 was another October shipper. All I know is that the issue had a 1990 cover date, and the Now run ended in 1990, and the subtitle for this episode will be 1990. The last 2 episodes of our Now coverage can cop the names off the remaining miniseries, and I figure it's 2031, and the battle continues is too long. All this is to avoid talking about this last comic, whose cover artist was too ashamed to take credit for their painting of the Metal Warrior. That's right, the penultimate issue of the run has someone in a video game mech suit, Spitfire, and the prototype, or whatever. The story is titled The Battle of Cuba, and is by the usual suspects. And boy, this sure is what we've come to expect, if not more so. Bulbous characters with asymmetrical features that look like partially melted plastic figurines, garishly colored with haphazard blobs of shading, speaking excruciating expository dialogue or introducing yet more character/technology that will disappear forever in an issue or two. Like, they spend pages telling us how awesome Habitat is, and show us all these cool weapons they've developed. Plasma rifles 10 times more powerful, because nothing can ever be a modest improvement. Premise breakers like personal force fields, an armored suit with laser gauntlets and power shields. But when the Terminators show up, and they seriously filed out of the Blue Oyster Bar in matching sunglasses and leather vests without shirts like the power tops they are, none of the fancy toys matter. Habitat is destroyed, and a few escape on the submarine with their lives. Nothing is set up that can't be destroyed at the end of the playdate. In the end, Essie is pregnant with twins, marries Chi Gao, and they stay in Cuba. They will definitely all die off panel. Everyone else joins the Sea Wind in its return trip to Russia, all except Doyle, the T2 Sarah Connor prototype, the one character who's been in the book longer than anyone, the one they went to great lengths establishing as claustrophobic. She is presumed dead after taking over the Metal Warrior suit that is known to rapidly kill its wearer as she held off the Terminators before Habitat drowned. They even do her ghostly image grinning over the wedding in the sky on the last page. I need a drink.
It's the year 2024! In the month of April, Terminator, The Burning Earth, with Mr. Jose Fixit.
New targets acquired. Artificial twins. Bill at Spy Vinyl. C.H. Chris at Bat Books for Beginners. Chris Dunford. Chris Lydon.
Cynthia Sanders, Dave's Comic Heroes blog. Del Dracula, who wrote, I have that dog issue, but it's the only one I have from back then, and probably the only one in my whole collection, aside from the Alex Ross issues picked up much later at half-price books.
Derek W.C.
Dr. Pop Culture.
Dirk Ashton. Ed Moore.
At Teal Productions. Fish Stick 22 Road Cool Show. Francisca Staines.
Gregory Litchfield. Iowa Joe is The Irredeemable Shag. Julia Rowell.
Who added, Rust is a comic I have never read but I have seen. A ad for the series in I think the first issue of Spawn. Looked interesting. I had no idea that Tom Tenney drew issues of Terminator. To me he was the Force Works guy.
Kailash Juan Marquis.
Karen Hilly.
Keith G. Baker. Lamar the Revenger. Lorenzo Sleestack.
Lucretia. Mary Bailey.
Max O. Miguel Quiros. Mike at Send Aliens to Me.
Nancy the Cat Girl. No Pop. Pale Winter Peanut Cop.
Richard Field.
Sarah Bush.
Siskoid.
Stacy Reese.
Superbound. Talk Nerdy to Me. And
Terrace Hardpoint.
You have been listening to Terminator Now, a Rolled Spine podcast. It is in no way associated with Himdale Film Corporation, James Cameron, not even Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm just the best impersonator Frank could find, but I'm pretty good, right? No infringement of rights are intended, and it's all covered by fair use. Anyway, nobody's making any money on this thing, and hardly anyone is listening, so don't waste your lawyer's time.